Hello, everybody. So today I am going to do something special for Vlogmas. Obviously, I'm going faceless because I am stuck at my parents' house while I am having car problems. So, bleh. Anyway, I'm going to tell you about every self-published book I've ever read and tried to read in the order I read them. Now, there are going to be some rules. I'm only talking about books that have been self-published by and exclusively self-published writers in today's publishing climate. This means books like Brandon Sanderson's Secret Projects, self-published books that were later picked up by a press, and books that were published before KDP and Ingram Spark was a real thing are out. So you won't see Tress, The Martian, Beowulf, stuff like that in this video. So let's go straight to the books after the intro. Roll it. The very first self-published book I ever read was Unspeakable Acts. It is the worst book I've ever read. It was basically 50 Shades of Grey meets the Hardy Boys, and so much just over-the-top shock value with no real purpose, and there was a major plot hole in the story. I think the cover's cool, but just the writing itself was not up to par. So the next one I read was The Day the Flowers Died by Amy Blackwelder, and this one is just mediocre at best. I read this after I became a major reader again during the pandemic, and the author was a critique buddy of mine. I wouldn't call this a good book, but it was readable. I think I gave it 2 stars. But part of this, too, is I am just done with World War II in Europe. Done. So next was, because of Caleb Joseph's YouTube channel, I read Quarantined with a Lumberjack. And this was erotica where, you get the hockey players, I think, are a big thing, or, the doctors are a big, sub-genre of crazy erotica, billionaire romance type thing. Well, this one was with a lumberjack, and it's about a girl who's doing her, thesis, a girl, she's, 24, doing her thesis in, Colorado, and the virus comes, and she is quarantined with a lumberjack, and they just bang. There is so much sex, and I was just not ready for it. This was the first straight erotica I ever read. I wasn't ready, we'll put it that way. Next was Kissing the Coronavirus, and I absolutely loved it. 4 stars. This was totally self-aware in its ridiculousness. It was a joke. My ovaries were clashing together just with the laughter. And the author's bio might be the funniest part. She lives alone with her 20 ferrets or something, which I'm sure is made up. But if only she had guinea pigs and not ferrets. So next is Kissing the Coronavirus Volume 2, the second wave. Oh my gosh, this one was not as good as the first one, but I did like the part about the main character chewing on foreskin like a tough bit of chicken. There we go. And the next was The Cyborgtaker by Meg Latour. This is the weirdest book I've ever read. It lacked even anything resembling self-awareness. This was meant to be taken seriously. And you can see my vlog up in the corner. It's the third video I think I ever posted on YouTube, and one of the more popular. And I'm pretty proud of it, but there was just too much going on in this book, and none of it really worked. Next was Breach of Peace. So this one, obviously is by Daniel Green. I don't really like detective dramas very much anyway, but this one just had a lot of big flashing red lights. Here, this is the bad guy. And it seemed very unfinished, and it definitely needed to be longer. I understand it was a novella, and I understand that he was introducing us to his world through the novellas, but I think he should have just worked a little bit harder on his main story and put everything that is told to us through the novellas just in the novels. Next was Penetrated by the President's Twitter feed. Obviously outdated, it's not Twitter anymore. But it had the same self-awareness as all of Edward's book, but it did lack the depth, pun intended, of the COVID series. Weirdly, though, I kind of liked how the main character was so turned on by the power, because I think a lot of women might be like that. And then next was I Bleeping Hate Zoom Quizzes. This was not good. It was just a bunch of random poems about 2020 and masturbating on Zoom. It was boring but quick, and I'm really not a poetry person to begin with. So My Immortal. I don't really know if this counts as self-pub since it was originally a fan fiction, but there are no words. And the next is Ice Planet Barbarians. I'm including this one because I read the self-published version, and I read it to torture myself, but actually ended up loving it because the high stakes, the weirdness, the unpredictability, and most of all, I just wanted these girls who had been abducted to be okay. And it was so well structured. The writing was nothing to swing a stick at, but it wasn't meant to be. It was so readable, and I have reread this since then. And next was The Countess of Haberland and Other Stories. This was like a little 2 short story, I think, collection by a former booktuber. I haven't seen him on BookTube. And I sent him a DM a while ago, wishing him happy birthday. He has the same birthday as me. And he didn't respond, so I think he's gone for BookTube. But this was about murder and also about a bunch of people traveling on the stagecoach. It was readable, but not necessarily enjoyable. Alright, the next one I read, because I read it for a vlog, which you can see here, was Voice of War. So this one actually made me really sad. This was mediocre, and it really lacked a lot of creativity that we need in fantasy novels. The thing about characters having light-colored eyes so they have special powers is just so overdone and really uncreative. And there were a lot of, cool biopunk elements that I liked, but the writing on a sentence level was good, which I think, in my opinion, proves that creative writing can be taught, but not necessarily creativity can be taught, and the dialogue was painfully bad. So next, I read Prelude to Insurrection, and I remember nothing about it. And then after that was Stones of Light. So this was a big step down from Voice of War. The characters hadn't changed at all, and the writing oftentimes didn't really make a lot of sense. For example, the author used a lot of animal comparisons where he described a character as stalking like a viper, which made no sense. Vipers don't do that. Vipers are ambush predators. So it was kind of like, what? And there was also a big discussion towards the end about a character doing something right just because it was right, but we never really got a sense of how the character knows right from wrong. And same comment as the dialogue from Voice of War. And this book actually sparked that Twitter/X beef that I have with the author, and pretty much set up my role of not communicating with authors outside of interview spaces. So, yeah, not a good experience with this. So then came Rebel's Creb. This was deeply unfinished, all over the place, just bizarre. And this was actually my worst book of 2022. And then Seasons of Albidone. This is my favorite self-published book I've ever read. I've spoken enough about it. I'm going to give you an elevator piece. So 4 seasons, 4 different vignette, novelette type stories about this place called Albidone, which is crumbling down. Don't let the cover fool you. I think it's a terrible cover because the story is so dark, and it can be really jarring when you're reading it when all of a sudden a character gets their throat cut or a child blows up. So yeah, just don't let the cover fool you. This is very dark. And then came the sequel, A Contract and Thorn. Now, this was bad. And sadly, the worst part of it was the story. It just didn't make sense. The scenes were entertaining, so I was able to keep reading it, but they didn't all really fit together, especially the first 30%. It was just this very weird aside that I'm sure will come back in the sequel, but there was definitely a better way to do it where it was just like the most easily resolved aside ever. But I really liked the main character, who's a djinn, and there were some fun Easter eggs from Albidone. The next one I read was Harbinger of Justice, which I did a faceless review of, and I really liked it. So the first half was too busy and pretty confusing, but then in the second half it was like a total 180, and it became much more confident, extremely well paced and focused, and I can't wait for the next one, honestly, if it's going to be as good as the second half of the first book. Andrew Watson, I've spoken to him as a booktuber, not as a writer, other than telling him that I read his book. He's a great guy, and I don't know if the sort of jumbledness of Harbinger of Justice is from inexperience, or if this is going to be one of those series where people are like, oh my god, it's so good, but you have to get past the first book. And then next was Barbarian Alien. This was hilarious, just like Ice Planet, but the main character was more annoying, so that's it. And then Barbarian Mine. I think there's another one in between it, but I didn't read it because I didn't know there was another one between it. And this one is just Stockholm Syndrome at its finest, but it had some good tiebacks to Barbarian Alien, and this is the first time we get to see a little human baby alien hybrid, and it was kind of funny. And then next was The Never King, and I feel like this one was kind of actually meant to be taken seriously, even though it was kind of hard to, because the writing on the sentence level was great. And I like to call this reverse harem erotica novel a well-written piece of crap. It's about Wendy and Peter Pan and all the lost boys, and they fuck. So The Way of Aan was next, and this is pure classic fantasy, but to be honest, it was a lot of intellectual work to get through this. I really, really loved it. I just wish it wasn't written at such a high reading level, and I didn't have to work so hard to get through it. It was kind of like swimming through syrup. It was sweet and tasty, but it hurt my arms, we'll put it that way. And then Seduced by the Pumpkin Spice Latte. Loved it, guys. This is about a girl who goes to get a pumpkin spice latte and ends up masturbating in Starbucks. Then a pumpkin spice latte sex cult emerges. It was funny, and I feel like weirdly plausible because I know pumpkin spice lattes kind of have a cult following, and I really don't like pumpkin spice lattes. I think they are gross. And actually, I don't really like hot drinks in general. The only time I will drink a hot drink is I'll drink tea when I have a sinus infection. Hot tea. Okay, so now we're going to move on to my DNFs. And these are at least the ones that I can recall. So the first one, the first self-published book that I attempted to read but did not finish, like actually more than just like flipping through the first sentence, I actually tried to read this, was Lightblade, and this was because it had poor writing on a sentence level, some really confusing story elements, and I had a pretty hard time following what was going on, and I DNF'd it at 5%. Then my next DNF is Talors Guest. This is a children's book, and I just wasn't in the mood for it. I just didn't feel like reading a cozy little kind of Hobbit-esque children's book at the time, but I definitely do plan to reread it when I want something light and cozy, and it's also on my classroom wish list. If you want to get my students a present, see the link below. And then Nea Story, that is another YouTuber book that was basically written by a screenplay in past tense, because I know all of that. I know the author is primarily a screenwriter, and it showed. And then there was I Am Mercy, and that is some of the worst dialogue I've ever read. It had a great concept. It was about a girl who had magical powers during the Black Death and is wrongfully accused of witchcraft, but then she realizes that she is an actual witch, and the writing just didn't live up to the concept, though it is an absolutely beautiful cover. The next was A Touch of Light. Oh, this was awful. You can see my vlog here where I try to read it, and I actually go through a miniature mental breakdown, partly because of this book. Alright, so these are the ones that I have in my possession, but I haven't read yet. So I have Gilded Kingdom, A Path of Blades, The Sword of Kaigan, 11th Cycle, The Bloodstones, A Song for the End of the World, The Prophet of Edan, Gunmetal Gods, Of Blood and Fire, The Field, The Written, The Wolf of Withervale, The Battle of Evermore, The Sting of Darkness, The Trials of Ashimont, The Severing Sun, Troll, Beckoning of the Gate, Beautiful Demons, Visitor's Blood, The Savior's Champion, and A Prescription for Possession. And so that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun making it. And if you want any recs for any of the books in here, whether I recommend them or not, this was kind of just a quick run through. Leave it in the comments. Which one of these have you read, and which one's your favorite, and which ones do you think I should push up on my TBR? So, in conclusion, keep reading, keep writing, keep loving words, and I will talk to you next time. Bye! Guess you get to see my face. I just realized I forgot to mention Dreams of the Dying, which was one of the first self-published books I DNF'd, and I will link my review of that in the section below, down there.